Welcome to another podcast of Southern Dirt Motorsports. My name is Randall Davis, and I'll be filling in today for Steve Winson and Mike Loom. What we want to bring to you today, we've had the drivers of these cars that made racing what it is today. We've had mechanics of these cars, and today we want to talk to you about some of these cars. Now, I have a very good friend, been a friend for a life, probably will be for the rest of my life also, Mr. Roy Freeze. Roy has got this unique hobby of collecting and restoring vintage race cars. They're actually the race cars that was used on the tracks back in the day, and I've had the honor and privilege at some time or other being lined up with all of these cars myself. Maybe not at the same time on the same track, but at some time or other, I was lined up with each one of these cars. I also have with me is Gary Lorance. Gary is the son of Earl Lorance, and he knows a lot of the history of these cars, and he'll be helping us with this. And now, Roy, could you tell us what got you into this unique sport of restoring vintage race cars?
Back in 2008, I was having a lot of health issues, and went and seen a doctor, and they diagnosed me with the beginnings of dementia and Alzheimer's. But the doctor told me and my wife, hey, he needs to find something that he can do that he enjoys. And so in 2010, I retired, and I started piddling, is what I call it, on these old race cars. And that's kind of how I got into it. And I got to thinking, you know, if I don't save the history of these cars, the younger generation's never gonna know where they came. This car behind us is Lewis Flatt's car. Of course, we always called him Pappy. I've owned this car twice. First time I bought it back in, I don't know, it might have been 72, 73. Found it over at Murfreesboro with in a junkyard over there to get the safety hub off of it to go on a race car we were running at that time. And sold the car, and it was gone for about 30 years. And I stumbled back across it and brought it home with a cedar tree, drove through the top of it, and started restoring it. And at the time, I didn't know the car belonged to Pappy Flatt. Gary brought Lee Earl down here, and Lee Earl said, that's Pappy Flatt's sedan. And we're 95% sure this is probably the first car that ever had the trailing arms under it. That AAA truck, of course NASCAR runs them back in the day, but we believe this is the first car. Now, we don't know between the time that Pappy Flatt sold the car and I found it in Murfreesboro in a junkyard, did Pappy Flatt didn't put the trailing arms under it, or did somebody else put the trailing arms under it? There's a lot of history about these cars that we really don't know anything about. When we find them, all we know, we've got a race car, and it takes quite a while for to figure out who it belonged to and how much history is really about the car. We do know that Pappy Flatt runs 6-cylinder motors back in the day. So is it possible this is a true car that he built? We don't know. All we know is that what you see is what it is. It's got a 60 Chevrolet truck frame under it, and it's got a 256 cylinder in it. And but basically the bottom line is there's so much history about these cars that are just unknown. And I'll show you a picture of the car, what it looked like when I first brought it home. None of them looks like they do now. The big thing is when you start working on cars that are 60 and 80 years old, you better have a good parts store. Because when you walk in a parts store and tell a guy you need a set of brake shoes for a 37 Ford, and he's not even 37 years old, but he's willing to help you, that means a lot. And I've had a real good parts store over a period of years, and boys have really helped me a lot with this stuff.
Let me say too, Roy goes to a great extent to make the cars look like they did when they were on the track. When he can come up with pictures of them, he does, even the decals on them, if he can duplicate them and put them on it and make it look like the car that it looked when it was last on the racetrack. He goes to a great extent of doing that. Now, I do know that Lewis drove this car because it's got my wheel mark on the other side of it where Lewis and I got together one night at the old Magnum VFW Speedway. And Lewis was a good friend of mine, and it was just a racing deal that happened. But I do know from that he did race this car.
This pure decal, when I started sanding a mill car, I found part of this decal. Well, I looked and I hunted and I searched and I couldn't figure out what this decal was. And finally I figured out this decal went on a pure gas pump. It wasn't a decal that you could buy or they would give you to put on a race car. It honestly went on a pure gas pump back in the day.
One of the things I'll mention too that some of you out there may realize, Fred Flat was the son of Lewis, and Fred was a Pepsi Cola man, and he was sponsored by Pepsi Cola for many years and became a real prominent racer. And I don't know if him or his folks are doing any of it today, but Fred was a real popular racer in his own lifetime too. So,
well, that's something else I kind of figured out. After I painted this car, I figured out that it was supposed to be Pepsi Blue. And it also was supposed to have Pepsi Bottling Company on the side of it. But like I said, that was 10 years after I started, I found all this out. So, you know, like I said, and I think Gary talks about back in the day, nobody made no pictures because if you had money for a camera, that was gas money for a car. So nobody really had a camera to make any pictures with. So there's not a lot of history about these cars on photography in any manner.
I will say, for somehow though, Roy comes up with pictures where folks has got them laying around. People do send him pictures of the car when they hear he's restored them. So he's well known for his ability of restoring cars, and people do get in touch with him. And I've got to say, not because he's one of my best friends, but he does. I've never seen anybody do a better job with restoring vintage cars than Roy does.
I was so glad to see Roy get started in this because we went for years and nobody didn't do the restoring on them. They just most of them just went to the junkyard, and when they go to the junkyard and they're crushed, they're gone, and there's no history left of them. What Roy's got is like a museum. It's like a history of those cars and the races, and that goes on all back to the 50s, like 58, 7, 8, 9. But I'm glad to see him get into that.
One of my big deals was I always said I was born 8 or 10 years too late. Randall made this comment a lot about when I was walking under their feet, that I wouldn't. He didn't think I was paying any attention about what they were doing. But he said it's very obvious I was comprehending everything that they were telling me, even though I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old.
Roy actually remembers some things that I wished he had forgotten, but he does. But he does still remember them, and at the proper time, he exposes those to us. And I've got to tell this too. Roy was in the cruise-in business, and everybody had a Chevelle, Nova, Mustang, something like that. And he decided he would build these vintage race cars and take the cruise in. And I can say, matter of fact, I've witnessed it myself. They get a lot of attention, and it also allows you to discuss the history of these cars and what made car racing what it is today.